Hey, what is going on, everyone? This is Dorrani from VG247, and I am joined by Sherif and James. And the boys have been playing The Ascent on
Yes.
Xbox Game Pass. Yes,
Well, I played it on PC,
on
but it is
PC.
it is on Xbox Game Pass.
Xbox Game Pass is growing ever better. Firstly, how are you guys?
I'm all right, man. How are you?
All good. Thanks for asking. And you, James?
I'm good as well.
Good, good, good. So, The Ascent, I want an elevator pitch. Just one sentence from both of you. Describe what the Ascent is. It can be as wacky of a description as you want. So Sharif, go
Mm.
first.
All right, cyberpunk top-down shooter RPG mechanics in a really beautiful design, like perfectly designed cyberpunk world.
I'm sold. And you, James.
Well, I'm sure we'll come into this later, but when we're talking about the cyberpunk thing, I'd more say that it's more of a Schwarzenegger sci-fi simulator.
Okay.
That's the kind of angle I'd take on it.
Okay, and what is the Ascent actually? No elevator pitch. What is it actually now? Go ahead, Sharif.
Yeah, it is that. It is it's an indie basically I thought of it as a top-down shooter because that's what they showed.
Mhm.
You've seen one, you've seen them all. You just go around doing stuff, but then when I played it, it's actually much bigger in scope than that. It's a kind of an open world. You have a bunch of like hub areas,
Mhm.
a few different open worlds. You take quests from people. You have main missions and side missions. You have a bunch of abilities that that you can use, like active abilities. A bunch of really destructive and powerful stuff,
Yeah.
and you have some augments that you can really change how you play as a character. Like you can have a dash instead of a roll. You can have like a leap, a bunch of like really cool boosts to your abilities. It's much deeper than the trailer would have you believe.
Okay. I think that's always good. Sometimes though, sometimes I feel like sometimes if they don't show like some of the more flashier parts, people might not be that interested. But for those who are interested and do play it, they're in for a welcome surprise that it's actually more that it has more depth than it let on. I think that's always good. Um so talk to me about the aesthetic. I feel like everyone just wants to say this is cyberpunk, but it's not top down, is it? It's like the asymmetric.
Isometric
Isometric.
Isometric.
at an angle, right?
At an angle, yeah, yeah. Cause I see someone getting quite upset saying that there's another game called Death's Door that is obviously the same thing, and they said it's a top down, and people are, oh my god, it's not actually top down because that top down is like how the old GTA games were and shit, and it's like
Yeah.
get over it. So yeah, it has this cyberpunk aesthetic. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about how the game sort of looks, feels. Um, yeah, go ahead.
So I think that with cyberpunk, we talk about it as quite a kind of homogenous genre, really. That we think of, well, you think of Blade Runner particularly, or
Yeah.
Cyberpunk 2077, sort of rain slick streets, very wordy, very talky, sort of quite moralistic and philosophical, kind of ruminating a lot. But there is a lot more to the genre than that. I think this leans a lot more into the kind of Aliens, RoboCop, Total
Mhm.
Recall style of sort of cyberpunk and sci-fi that is a lot kind of meatier. That's why I
Yeah.
say it's like a Schwarzenegger sci-fi simulator.
Okay.
That you're a kind of submachine gun slinging kind of meathead, in as much as it, you spoke before, Sharif, that the kind of RPG mechanics and stuff. I
Yeah.
don't really think that there's that much role playing going on.
No.
It's definitely a shooter first, and I think that's a really an interesting part of the aesthetic. That it is a lot more of that kind of ultra violent side of the cyberpunk archetype. It's definitely got a lot of Blade Runner in the city design and in the markets and in the kind of
Yes.
neon signage and stuff like that. But if you come to it expecting a very wordy, philosophical, Blade Runner esque style thing, I think you're gonna find something a little bit different there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very true.
it's definitely like yeah, it's not. It is more. It is much deeper than I imagined. Thinking it's to just be like a standard top-down shooter, but it is definitely not an RPG. Like there are cutscenes, there are some dialogue options. The game almost seems like it's trying to get them out of the way very quickly. Like they're stacked on top like bullet points on the back of a box. It's not like even like a rotary wheel where you're like, oh, if I go to the right, that's positive. If I go to the left, that's negative. It's just you're asking questions, the character is answering them, and then you're moving on with your life.
Hmm.
Really, the meat of the game is the shooting and the action. The RPG elements on top of it are almost like almost a topping on a cake. It's like, oh, that makes things a little bit interesting in terms of mobility and like your abilities and stuff. But they're not really like you're not going to be sitting down looking at a stats page trying to think like what should
Yeah.
I boost. There's a skill tree that you boost some stuff, some attributes into, but it's not like on the level of like a really true RPG. The thing that I will add to the world design, it's definitely as you mentioned, James, inspired by Blade Runner and a lot of the uh, kind of sci-fi of the 80s, like the Paul Verhoeven Total Recall stuff. uh, it doesn't do a lot with the world. It does a lot with the design and the aesthetics. You'll be basically the name of the game is the Ascent, which is the name of a corporation in the game, but it's also your ascent into essentially rich people's areas from like really down in the gutter.
Mm.
And as you move up throughout the game, there's a really cool like change in design that you see in the clothes that the people like the NPCs running around are wearing, in like even how well maintained like every aspect of their life is.
Yeah.
It's really cool until you reach the peak. I don't want to spoil it, but like the basically the where the richest of the game reside looks nothing like the rest of the game, to the point that it makes you think, was this how it was supposed to look?
Yeah.
And then this is where it is now. It's really beautiful.
That's good. So it's a rags to riches story in disguise.
Kind of. It's in that universe. It's a really quite grim, really late capitalism world. You play as they call them indents, which is basically short for indentured servitude.
Hmm.
So you're essentially a slave.
Oh.
Like all the people, they live their lives basically working for corporations, like mega ultra massive corporations, to pay debt they owe to these corporations. So you're essentially, it's not even like a like, oh, I'm just making money and there's the only way to make money is to work for them. No, you're paying debt to them and you have to work for them. That's it. Like you don't have a choice.
That sounds like
Uh,
a harsh life, man.
and the end of the game is not even like a celebratory like, oh, I made it, I got out. No, it's you just made some adjustment and the game is
Mm.
very clear, like, oh, this is much better than what you used to be, but it's still pretty fucking terrible. Like it's not even, it's not a beautiful like, oh man, we did it, like power to the people. No.
Yeah.
I found that pretty amazing because they really commit to this really grim aesthetic that they have in basically everything that happens. It's just like there, nothing loves you in this world. Everything is just out to make money the
Yeah.
most efficient way possible.
Wow. You spoke about the it not being as much as an RPG as it might let on to be. What's the sort of ratio here? Is it more like how much percent of a shooter is it, and how much percent is like the storytelling and RPG? If you could just like rough figures.
I think that it's definitely a shooter first. I think I'd probably say something like 80-20. I
Okay.
think that the stats part of the
Yeah.
game is probably one of the worst communicated and probably one of the weaker parts of the game. I think when you level up, because there's XP and leveling up and all that sort of stuff, and you can create a character build with by putting points into different skills that give you more health or a better critical hit ratio or something like that, and that's very easy to understand. But at the same time, you have these kind of stats that seem to go up at the same time with your skills. I don't know if you understood it, Sharif. Maybe I'm just being dumb. But with your armor, you've got like a head stat, a lower body stat, an upper body stat. I have absolutely no idea what that does. Absolutely no idea. And then with
Yeah.
there's a neurotics thing, a cybernetics stat, a biotic stat. Absolutely no idea what those do. They're just numbers on a little screen that seem to go up when I put points in stuff. And I think the RPG parts of it are the least developed and the least well communicated. And as Sharif mentioned, you're not picking through dialogue trees. There is a critical path. The characters on that critical path just seem to come and go,
Yes.
and you don't really have much external motivation other than this is the quest that you're going on now. This is your next main quest. You're not a driver in this story, and other than you are ticking off tasks that other people give you. At the start of the game, there's kind of your boss, and he's not very nice to you. But for some reason, when everything kind of kicks off in the story, you just keep being his errand boy for some reason, and that's
Mm.
something that and that's something you'd maybe try and subvert in a more RPG, in a more choice focused thing. If you because I think with this was one of the main things with Cyberpunk 2077 that I think everybody touches with when they're talking about cyberpunk RPGs or whatever, that there was kind of the illusion of choice when they'd kind of promised that there would be a bit more of a you'd be able to drive their story in different directions. This is even less so than that. They're not even promising that you can have a choice in the different directions that the story go.
Mm.
It's not an RPG in the sense that you are making decisions that have a big overarching outcome on the story minute to minute kind of thing. So when we say that it is a shooter first and RPG second, we really mean that.
Yeah. Okay. So you're more of a passenger in this game. So is it more like action adventure than action RPG then, or is that wrong to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. The RPG stuff is really. I completely
Minimal.
agree with you, James. On like a lot of these stats, they don't make sense. Like you can see some of the armor that you pick up is like, oh, it's boosting this purple thing. What does that actually do? I have no idea. The game doesn't tell you that. There's a big codex that you can read, but I only read it to get some idea of the lore and like the races and the world of the game.
Mm.
I was like, okay, this is going to make sense at some point because like if I'm making builds, none of that. I've finished the game and none of that has really come into play. The only thing that you really care about as far as like investing in character progression is like a bunch of like really simple abilities. It's like, okay, this is gonna reset your reticle faster, so your reticle expands as you shoot full auto. That's gonna reset it faster, so you don't have to basically tap fire as often. Stuff like that. It's like, okay, your dodge is gonna recharge faster. Your energy is gonna have, instead of your energy which you use on grenades and things like that, is gonna have more. Your health is gonna have more points. It's stuff like that. That's the stuff that really matters. There's an outline of an RPG thing with like a bunch of like like shapes and names and things going on that you're like, what does that actually do? I have no idea. I feel like it's maybe was intended for something that they didn't quite
Mm.
know how to finish or didn't have time to. And I think from that is really a lot of like these quote unquote RPG aspects are either unfinished or they exist in a state that you're like, this is fine, but like why is it here? For example, the game has loot. Like as you go around the world, you're getting loot, but all the loot is the same. You're essentially getting a bunch of like handcrafted items,
Hmm.
and they have. So let's imagine like there are 6 or 7 armor sets in the game. This is what you're going to be getting for the entirety of the game. Doesn't matter if you're fighting in a low level area or a high level area. They have assigned like the high level armor you're only going to get in high level areas. The low level armor you're only going to get in low level areas. That's it. The same E5 helmet, whatever it is going to be the same one with the same stats. It's the same look as everything that you're getting. And then for the weapons, they did the same thing, but they almost made it worse by having weapons have like they call them marks. It's like Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3. And every single weapon you get is functionally and aesthetically the same. And it's always going to be at Mark 1 unless you have some version of that weapon. Let's say it's an assault rifle and you've been using it for the entirety of the game, so you're upgrading it as you go. all assault rifles that you get in the future are going to be at the mark level that you have it at. So if it's Mark 7 or Mark 6, you're almost going to get it at Mark 6, at those figures. But if you get a shotgun that you want to try late in the game, it's going to be Mark 1. So it's almost practically, useless, because you
Mhm.
then have to go back and upgrade it to bring it up to task with like everything else. And then you can try it, and then you say, oh, I don't like this.
Ooh.
So you have wasted like precious upgrade materials on that. And I just don't understand, like, if you're going to have handcrafted weapons, let that be the thing. I don't need to get like 6 of the same assault rifle. That doesn't add
Yeah.
anything to the game. If you're just going to have handcrafted weapon, like, do it like armor. Have them basically be gated by content, and have like, oh, the shotgun is only good because it only drops in late areas, or
Yeah.
the AR is meant to be like a starter weapons that you're supposed to get rid of. It's stuff like this that you're like, oh, this is, it's a little bit underdeveloped, but like, it doesn't really, to me, doesn't prevent this game from really doing well in what it does, which is action.
Yeah, it's a questionable design choice. You have to go easy, Sharif. This game was devved by like 10 people, dude.
Yeah, it's like
I
there's
think
like
it's
16 people.
12 people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a core team of like 16 people, and then it's like they have a bunch of, like, if you read the credits, they work with a bunch of like
Third
external
party.
studios. Yeah, they have like names that you would recognize, like Wushu and Lucid Games, and a bunch of like teams of like, oh, we're doing cinematics, we're doing this, we're doing that.
Yeah. But was the combat fun? Was the combat fun? One thing that they are pushing quite a bit is this cover system. They speak about it a lot in their promo, in their marketing. Oh god, you can take cover, and on the surface, you can take cover. What to do? But like, does the combat feel weighty? Does it feel like nice to engage with, regardless if the weapon progression system is a bit weird?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the combat. I think it's weighty, as you say. It's difficult without being too difficult. I think of another game that we've spoken about before, Dorrani. It's not the game. The Ascent does throw a lot of enemies at you in some situations, but it's not, as I say, like another game that we've spoken about, Dorrani,
Yeah.
Outriders, where you're just thinking, what were they thinking when there was when you fight any other enemy that's got a gun?
Yeah.
And you talk about the cover system. It's one of those things that you don't necessarily have to use, but when you remember to use it, it is quite powerful. As I say, in the Ascent, there are some other enemies that do have guns at some point, but they do just wander up and shoot you, and you can't really do much about it. And you're thinking, what am I meant to do about this? And what you're meant to do about it is hide in cover. And one of the main things about the shooting is that there are kind of 2 levels or 2 layers of like a hip fire, and then you can kind of bring it up to your eye and shoot on a kind of higher layer. And when you first start up the game, you think, Jesus, the shooting in this game's awful. And that's because you're holding the right mouse button to aim it, and you're shooting above everybody's head.
Oh, okay.
And that's another thing that's maybe not incredibly communicated right out of the gate, so it doesn't make an incredible first impression. But once you get the hang of it, you can use that kind of 2-layered system to hide behind cover, shoot over cover, shoot enemies that are hiding behind cover. And there is an element of kind of tactical flexibility that you can employ, more so than what you would expect in a normal kind of twin stick shooter, the way you're just throwing out all bullets all the time. You can definitely play it that way, but there is as I say, a greater level of tactical flexibility where you can hang back a little bit more, use more abilities, focus on taking out different enemies in a more methodical fashion than just running and gunning. There are a few boss fights where you do just have to run and gun, where all that kind of flies out of the window. So you definitely don't have to play it at that slower pace if you don't want to. But is it as important as they say? You could definitely play the game without doing it. If your pinky finger is not very good at pressing the control on your keyboard or something, you don't have to sweat it too hard about learning how to crouch behind this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's fast. All of the weapons feel good. You definitely do get a sense for the ones that you like, and that you can, and that you pour your kind of upgrade materials into those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
More so than the other ones, but yeah, I enjoyed it on the whole.
It's
unusual.
definitely it's definitely I think the combat is I think toward like the best thing about it, like kind of with the world design. The cover system is I thought was a smart idea because they didn't they tell you about cover and they try to explain it, and obviously they have communicated it in trailers and stuff. But it's not really like a Gears of War cover where you just stick to it and then you shoot over it. It's almost like a dynamic thing, which is why I think like the decision to have like a button dedicated to essentially lifting the weapon, like James mentioned, which is harder to convey in an isometric setting because I did exactly as James said, which is the first couple of minutes of the game was like, why am I not hitting anything? Like I have clearly the laser is cutting through them. Why am I not hitting anything? And it took me like let's say less than 20 minutes to figure out like, oh right, I shouldn't hold right click because I played it with modern keyboard. It's like this should be like you should not give me this function until I have gotten through the first area of the game almost, because A, the first area doesn't have a lot of cover. It's just you're basically in tunnels, and B, if you give me a right click, I'm not gonna think as like, oh, he's lifting the weapon. I'm gonna think this is just more accurate. So that's what
Aim
I did.
down sight,
Anyway,
isn't it?
and
Like
on
every
site.
other game.
Exactly. That's obviously another thing, but whatever. I think it's smart because it lets you essentially treat cover dynamically without even having to crouch. If you see someone at a distance or coming at you, you can just lift your weapon up and shoot them, like get them to like 50% health, whatever, before they can even close the distance. And then when they get close to you, you can use your normal hip fire and take them out. And that also helps you avoid getting hit because a lot of enemies have physical projectiles that you can physically dodge or out of, and not necessarily hit scan. And this is amazing because it lets you again, like you could just even uh, do this like Call of Duty, just fucking crouch spam and or even just position yourself like at an angle right next to a tall cover, just so that you can send a couple of rounds downrange, hit them, and then back out, and then have their rounds hit the cover. It's really neat. I got the most use out of it in certain boss fight where you're supposed to defend an object and you're uh, getting swarmed from different angles. I think some of the encounter design kind of betrays that flow because they swarm you with melee enemies that obviously require your full attention because they're going to stun lock you and you need to deal with them before you can deal with the ranged people. But
Mm.
sometimes that balance kind of tips and it's like, well, I'm one person here. I can't just keep dodging forever. And I definitely can't sit and fight the main enemy. I have to just run around, to try to get rid of the smaller enemies, and then take a couple of shots. And by that time, another wave of smaller enemies have spawned. And I think that balance, I feel like maybe was made with co-op in mind.
Yeah.
I'd not play with anyone, but it's generally speaking, outside of certain encounters, you can play it however you want. You're going to get a lot of mileage out of utilizing that cover system, and like, or not even just a cover, just lifting your weapon up over cover. And enemies are going to do that to you as well. And rather than just playing it as a normal twin stick shooter and just going around just holding the trigger in the direction of enemies, I found it pretty cool. It doesn't get in the way too much.
Yeah. You mentioned co-op there. Of course, this is up to 4-player co-op or 3-player?
I believe it's 3.
3-player. Did you feel like there was any moments where you thought, okay, I needed 2 other players here with me in this, or were you fine solo through the whole thing?
I think it's the boss fights, as Sharif mentioned, in the kind of
Yeah.
set pieces
Yeah.
that you feel like you are the center of you're the center of attention of an enemy that has so many more tools to attack you than you have to be able to kind of return that attention. And and the game does give you really fun tools to deal with that. Actually, some of your augments let you spawn like little robots of varying descriptions, and those can take the aggro off you. So there's nothing where you feel like, because in some games, I can't remember, was it like Far Cry 3 or something that was just the same game whether you're in co-op or not? With the co-op mode, they didn't balance it at all. It's not like that.
I think it was Far Cry. I
Yeah.
think I remember playing Far Cry and it had like a crappy co-op mode where whoever was the host, they would like have the whole save file, and whoever
Yeah.
joined, it just wouldn't matter what
Exactly.
they'd done.
Yeah, it's not like that. You never get into a situation where you can't kind of tweak your build to be like to take some of the heat off you.
Yeah,
But yeah, definitely there are the bigger set pieces do seem to have been crafted with that kind of bigger player base in mind.
yeah, that's dope. You both played on PC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did it run? Did it run well? Any frame drops? Anything like clunky, or was it just amazing the whole way through? Because it looks from what I've seen, it looks fantastic, man.
I
Yeah, it
think in
looks.
yeah,
Go on,
I'll let
James.
Sharif go.
Yeah, it looks amazing. I couldn't try out ray tracing because the review build that we had uh, has a bug with DX12 that crashes it when you have ray tracing on, and the performance drops. Like I was trying to get ray tracing and DLSS on because I can't have ray tracing on alone. It will just run at 30 FPS. I just couldn't do it. It either ran at like ridiculously low numbers, like sub 30 FPS, which doesn't make sense, or it would crash. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna play it normal rasterized graphics for this playthrough. And yeah, like the on a 2080 Ti and a 9700K, it was for the most part. I don't think it dropped below 70 or 80 FPS. Most of the time, it was like over like 120 or 100, which is amazing, even with the
Yeah.
action. And it was smooth as hell was mouse and keyboard.
What about you, James?
Yeah, I think mine's something like 260 Super, something like that. I'm not a huge hardware guy, so
Yeah.
I just kind of put in what people tell me. But the I got a little bit stuttering, a little bit screen tearing, but those are really minor things. I think they're a lot of the times where we review things beforehand, we kind of get assurances that those things will be kind of ironed out in the wash by the time that people at large get to play it. I think that it's something that I bang on about a lot. But in the last few years, the lighting in games has gotten so much better.
Yes.
I think it just looks the lighting in it is just incredible. I think we've spoken about the aesthetic of the world and how well designed it is. I think that's the real strong point of the game in general, just the design and how it looks, and it's kind of hard to put in. You'll be able to see it while you're watching us talk over the top of the gameplay. That part of the game is really strong. I think the performance is pretty good as well. Yeah.
Cool. So it sounds, as a man who hasn't played it myself, from what you've said so far, I'm excited. I'm excited. Do you recommend the Ascent? Do you recommend it?
Yes, full recommendation.
Full recommendation. And
Yeah,
you,
it's
James?
a delightful game.
I think in trying to review this game, Sharif has a pretty unenviable task, really. What the game does really well, it does fantastically well. I think that might raise people's expectations a little bit too high.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of bits and pieces in this game that are quite poorly communicated. I think when you think about the quest markers and stuff, the city is really well designed in its aesthetic, but the signposting is very, very confusing. There are a lot of different layers of the city, so much so that the on mouse and keyboard there is just a key that gives you a line of where to go, because otherwise you would be completely lost. And if you stray too far from that path going from quest to quest, you just get thrown straight into people that are 10 levels higher than you. So
Came to the wrong neighborhood, buddy.
exactly, pretty much. You'll walk into a late game quest area and suddenly you'll be like level 8, and everybody in this just one house in the middle of an area that is the right level for you is suddenly level 20. Or I think of one of pretty much the first side quest in the game, which has a recommended level of 2. The area that you go to in that quest doesn't unlock till you're like level 8, level 10. So you just stood there. Is this a bug? Am I because there's no signposting to say that you can't get in this particular elevator that goes to the right place. So you're just pressing F.
Yeah.
Hilariously, you're pressing F to pay your respects to this elevator that doesn't work. And I think if you go in thinking this is going to be amazing. This is going to be such a wild ride with a beautiful city and all of this stuff. There are going to be rough corners that you might get a bit cheesed off with. I think I definitely recommend it if you're into that. If you like stuff like Ruiner, Ruiner is probably the closest thing that I would say. They devolve a digital game from like 3, 4, 5 years ago, something like that.
Yep.
If you're into something with that kind of aesthetic, the kind of RoboCop, as we said, the Total Recall sort of sci-fi edge, I think you're going to get a lot to like out of it. If you come in expecting something that's really, really polished and really perfect, you might not find that. So I think you need to measure your expectations based on what is actually in the game and not what you think could be in the game.
Yeah. Well said, boys. The both of you, well said. I just want to say that even if this game is something where you're sitting on the fence a little bit, if you have a PC, if you have an Xbox, with Xbox Game Pass, it is there. In my head, that sounded like so much of an ad. Sounded like so much of an advert. But honestly, I feel like we've been singing the Xbox Game Pass's praise so much of recent, and it deserves it. The Ascent is day one, so when you're listening to this, it'll probably be a few hours before the game releases. So even if you're just wondering or just cautiously optimistic, just grab it on Xbox Game Pass. It's also on Steam. Is it on any other systems or platforms? I don't think so. It's just Steam, Xbox, and PC, right?
I think Microsoft have locked it down, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yes. Although, disappointingly, there is no crossplay between Steam and Xbox or the Windows Game Pass version that you get, which is disappointing, but this is something that you should be aware of if you intend to do this.
Definitely. Right. That is the Ascent. Thanks for that, boys. I'm looking forward to it myself. Take care, everyone. Peace out.
Cheers.
See ya.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed it. It's free and you can always unsubscribe at any time. Take a look at our other videos if you like. Also, check out VG247.com for around the clock gaming news and updates.